Welcome to the broadcast, my dear old fruits. It is the first broadcast of the month of July, my birthday month, and the first broadcast under a Labour government. So in that spirit, it is time for me to remind you, my dears, to press subscribe if you mean to subscribe, or if you found yourself accidentally and tragically unsubscribed. Press the button now, my dear. Push the button, as Sugar Babes might say. I was watching Sugar Babes at Glastonbury on YouTube, and they were the only act worth watching, I've got to tell you. Fantastic singers. I think their voices, their vocals have been hugely underestimated over the years. They're a girl group, for those who aren't here in the kingdom. A girl group who I have been quite impressed by recently. But indeed, I digress. Check you are subscribed. Tinkle the notification bell. Not that it works for anybody anymore. You tell me it doesn't work for you. I tested it out. It's not working for me on other channels either. So I don't know what all that nonsense is about. But you know where to find me. You know where to find me if you need me. Just call me, as Diana Ross would say. The kingdom woke up this morning to a new Prime Minister. Yippee-doo-dah. And the end of 14 years of Tory power. And the Conservative Party did certainly not live up to their name, did they? They conserved absolutely nothing, and they presided over 14 years of managed decline. They are a disgrace. The Conservative Party are a disgrace, and it's no surprise to me that they're on the outs. As thoroughly disheartening as it is to herald the dawn of a Labour government, as far as I'm concerned. And for those of you that don't know, the last Labour government was ushered in 1997 under Tony Blair and remained in power until 2010. So it's been a long time since we've had a day like today here in the kingdom, where we switch from a Conservative to a socialist government. We have been led these past 14 years by a party who are Chino, I believe they're called these days, C-I-N-O, Chinos, Conservative in name only, with no feeling for the population outside of the London bubble, that bubble of elites and metropolitans and foreigners. Under this government's tenureship, we had David Cameron, we had Theresa May, we had Boris Johnson, who in my personal opinion, despite the disappointments of all the rest, was the biggest disappointment of all, because people placed their hope and trust and faith in him, however foolishly, however naively, 5 years ago. And he won a vast majority. Wasted spectacularly. Then we had Liz Truss, trussing along, didn't last very long, did she? And she's been furnished with security for the rest of her life, a security detail, because as a former Prime Minister, she gets that for doing her, less than 2 months in the position? Liz Truss, and then Fishy Rishi rocked up to the show. We didn't want him, but he placed himself in there. He was never elected. Liz Truss was never elected by the population, only by some party members. They weren't the ones that came along with the mandate. And none of those rectified the damage that was inflicted by Tony Blair's open invitation to third world countries. None of them stymied the flow of that escalation. And none of them offered a truly conservative alternative to socialism. Margaret Thatcher will be turning in her grave. I can't remember if she was cremated or not, but I remember she had a coffin. So was she buried? Either way, she'll be turning. And after receiving Rishi Sunak's resignation, the King received in audience the Right Honourable Sir Keir Starmer MP and requested him to form a new administration. The audience is recorded in the court circular as the kissing of hands, and Sir Keir accepted His Majesty's offer and was appointed Prime Minister and First Lord of the Treasury. This is His Majesty's third Prime Minister already. Liz Truss, as you remember, was appointed by the late Queen, of course, but Elizabeth died 2 days later, so that wasn't so much the kissing of hands as the kiss of death. So then, of course, he was Prime Minister under Charles, and then we had Rishi, and now we have Keir. So this is the King's first new government formed from a general election, the first one of his reign. And it will be followed by the state opening of Parliament, which is going to take place on the 17th of July, marking the formal start of the parliamentary year. The King's speech will also set out the government's proposed policies and legislation for the coming session. It is a landslide victory for Labour. The press love that word, don't they, my dear? Landslide. Well, that's what it is, although they did underperform compared to some expectations. And actually, when you study the figures and the statistics, there was certainly no great enthusiasm for Keir Starmer. It's just the way the cookie crumbled. Although the election result is in fact the most distorted in history. Labour, for example, won almost 2/3 of the seats available with just 1/3 of the popular vote. And here you can see in these tables how the share of the votes compares with the seats that have been won by each party. Do you see the difference there of Labour in red, what people voted for and what they won with regards to seats, and compare it, if you like, to Nigel Farage's Reform Party there in turquoise, and you see that they got a fairly decent share of the votes, but attained only 5 seats. So this actually is already raising questions over our first-past-the-post electoral system. What is a democracy if the end result of this election is something really rather unfair, or at least unrepresentative of numbers that turned up? Not to say that many turned up, but Nigel Farage's Reform, for those who are curious, as I say, secured just over 4 million votes, but only 5 seats in Parliament. The Greens won 4 seats with only 1.9 million votes. Do you see that? A similar number of seats for Reform at 5 seats and Greens at 4 seats, but vastly different on the numbers. Reform getting twice as many votes as the Greens, but getting virtually the same number of seats in Parliament. It's a peculiarity of the system, and I can't see how we can move forward without some of these things being ironed out. But certainly the humiliation was all for the Tories. The worst performance in modern history. And you might have seen Sorry Sunak, I think that should be his name going forward. Sorry. Well, he had the decency to apologise in his parting speech. He was very apologetic, and there is something to be said for folk who put their hands up and not evade or deny responsibility and shirk away from it. So I applaud him for that. But it's cold comfort. It's cold comfort. Instead of apologising now, why didn't he and his cohorts do what needed to be done over the last 14 years, my dear? I will say, my dear, with a streak of optimism, for civility, that I do appreciate the show of grace and courtesy and goodwill from both Sorry Sunak and from Keir Starmer. And I don't use queer in the new fashion of the LGBT, the letters community. The queeros, queer, the old-fashioned sense of the word, my dear. Marvellous, isn't it? But Keir Starmer, he's a queer fellow, if you ask me. But both of them spoke highly of each other in their speeches. And they did it with authenticity, whether or not they meant it. They spoke with authenticity, with chivalry, and like gentlemen. And I appreciate that from both sides. And to those of you in the fruit basket who voted Labour, I offer my goodwill without rancour. And although I'm not pleased at the result, I'm pleased that you're having a good day, my dear. I'm sure you're jubilant and excited and exhilarated. And it's fun for you. I know that whoever we vote for, we do it because we think it's in the best interests of the nation, don't we, my dear? However misguided you are. That's your affair. Also, as much as I dread what is coming, and I've got to just laugh at it, my dear, I made a pact to myself that I cannot poison my own constitution by going through the next few years hating every single day because we're under the red. because we're under a Labour government. I can't do that to myself, my dear, so I'm pouring myself a tonic of humour and a good old dose of acceptance. As much as I dread what's coming, I did actually, the big softy that I am, have a tear in my eye when Keir Starmer scuttled along to 10 Downing Street with his acceptance speech, and I recognise joy in his face and some emotion and the overwhelming feeling that it must be for somebody who was named after some other Keir of old, before Keir Starmer's birth, named after another, to make it all the way. And Keir Starmer, as I mentioned, is a neighbour of mine, you could say, from my sort of yard, from places that I know and love, the same pubs, the same streets. And being a Londoner, most of my neighbours are Labour voters. And just because it's not my cup of tea, it doesn't mean that I can't appreciate what an emotional, touching moment of triumph it is for Mr. Starmer and his family and his admirers and supporters. And I've got personal friends. They were part of his shadow cabinet. I have other friends who work very closely with Sadiq Khan, for example, his mayor. So now we've got sadist Khan and Keir Starmer running roughshod over London together. Joy, joy, joy. So much joy coming round the corner, my dear. I will also say that as painful as this is for those of us who have no truck for socialism and communism or Marxism, and some would say Trotskyism or even Pabloism with regards to Keir Starmer, this Tory government was a festering, putrid boil that needed lancing and excising. So as dismayed as I might be today, I would have actually felt more despair if the Tories had won. More despair if the Tories had won. They deserved to lose, and they deserved to lose badly and with every humiliation. The boil needed lancing. There are times in life that one has to accept the pain of the excision and suffer through it, or the gangrene continues to set in and the rot sets in, and that's what we've seen throughout this 14 years of the Tory government. Reform's Nigel Farage won his seat in Clacton. I am not going to disclose at this point whether or not I voted for his party or one of the other parties. I know that I've shared enthusiasm for him before, but as I told you, I was going to take my time to look through all the parties and all their policies, because it's a serious decision to make when one trots in to cast a vote and feel oh so important. I'm going to vote today, give me my pencil and mark across and have your say. Yes, it's a serious business, my dear. So at this point I will keep my counsel and be a little bit coy and not reveal who I voted for. But Mr. Farage does plan to keep going with his plans. His plan was always a 6-year plan to reach the 2029 election, become the opposition then, and get to number 10, or for one of his associates to get into number 10. Well, we are now going to see him in the House of Commons holding Labour to account, now that he's got a seat there, and I'm sure he'll be causing mischief and mayhem. And I drop this in because I've got many fruits abroad, many American fruits, have a particular affection for Mr. Farage, and they like to be kept informed. And the King is going to be meeting with Mr. Starmer to discuss government policies and priorities every week behind closed doors, as is tradition. And I have been binging, I've got to tell you, Margaret Thatcher, which isn't rare. I do this about once a year, but I have been binging her interviews on YouTube. It sends me down the rabbit hole, or the wormhole. I can never remember which hole it is, my dear, but isn't that what the actress said to the bishop? But quite literally, they do not make them like that anymore. What a woman. Politics aside, and when you look at the comments under all these hundreds of fabulous interviews we have, the archives of Margaret Thatcher, politics aside, the comments, even from Labour voters, whether it was from generations ago or now, they all say, wow, haven't things dumbed down the eloquence, the logic, the reasoning, the passion, the conviction, conviction politicians we had then from all sides, but she was especially eloquent. No matter what you think of whether she was right or wrong in her convictions, it came from the heart, from the root. It was based in faith and science. She was a scientist, and she really is a jolly inspiration to me and to anybody. She could answer questions without riddles, without rancour, and is a shining example of what was a sad reflection of what is now. But let's move on to today's royal romper and the return of King Cosy Socks. Ah, don't we love our King Cosy Socks? There he is. We've missed you. We've missed you, Your Majesty. As the King, the Queen and members of the royal family arrived in Scotland earlier in the week, and the palace of Holyrood House, Scottish culture, achievement and community. The ancient tradition of ceremony of the keys took place in the palace gardens, where the king was formally welcomed to the city of Edinburgh, receiving the keys to the city, his ancient and hereditary kingdom of Scotland. His Majesty met service chiefs before receiving a royal salute and inspecting the Balaclava Company, 5 Scots Guard of Honour, through an avenue of arches. Royal Week, or Holyrood Week as it's sometimes known, was abbreviated to just 2 days this year because His Majesty was duty-bound to return to London, as he did, to invite the new Prime Minister to form a new government in his name. But 100-year-old D-Day veteran Cyril Bird was in attendance, and wasn't it wonderful to see him? And also to see the Queen struggling in the breeze with this see-through brolly protecting her barnet. My dear, I've told you before, they have headscarves for these kind of things. That's what the late Queen would have told you. I'm sure, yes, we've seen Camilla in headscarves, but you might want to bring them out a bit more often. I think it might be more elegant than shuffling around, trying with all your might to hold that body in place. Although they did say there was a bit of drizzle in the air, so I understand why she was using it. And I do love a see-through brolly. But later in the day, the king held an investiture at the palace, while Queen Camilla hosted a reception to celebrate those who work to promote Scottish literacy. She wore this floral print by Fiona Clare, which is absolutely delicious, and I'm convinced we've seen it before, haven't we? I tried to look it up, but I couldn't remember where it was, but it was some ceremony. We got glimpses of that under a cape in church somewhere, didn't we? I'm sure it was that design, which I think was a Liberty print, but it's just gorgeous. Absolutely delicious on her, and it would make a very attractive pair of curtains. And this was a convivial affair. The atmosphere was gay, as Queen Camilla met bookshop owners and authors and illustrators and charities. And in the afternoon, their Majesties hosted guests at a garden party joined by the Edinburghs. And the king wore a jewelled tie pin, how jaunty, featuring the royal cipher of Tsar Boris III of Bulgaria. The Queen wore pale blue Fiona Clare with a Philip Tracy hat and Queen Mary's diamond thistle brooch. The Duchess of Edinburgh wore Roland Murray with bow detail to the side. She clutched a grey bag and wore Jimmy Choos. The guests, who have made a significant contribution to Scottish life, enjoyed the grounds and music from regimental bands and the Royal Scottish Piper Society, and also in attendance with a royal company of archers, who are the King's official bodyguards in Scotland. And since 1882, the company have been available for duty to the sovereign anywhere in Scotland. On day 2 of Royal Week, their Majesties were joined by Prince Charming himself, our sweet William, known as the Duke of Rothesay, when in Scotland, of course. They attended the Thistle service at St Giles's Cathedral, and the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh were installed to the most ancient and most noble Order of the Thistle, which is the greatest order of chivalry in Scotland, along with a few knights and baronesses. And afterwards, it was party time again, a celebration of the 900th anniversary of the city of Edinburgh. It took place at Edinburgh Castle, and the Queen wore the most divine shade of mint, this Anna Valentine creation, a wonderful coat there. Everybody was treated to a colourful and dynamic display of the very best of Edinburgh, and organisations showcasing innovation, food, design and charity. And their Majesties enjoyed a wee dram of whiskey. Ooh, or a big gulp of whiskey it might have been. Looks very refreshing, doesn't it? Quite the tonic. And they cut, or should I say, stabbed a cake, which was baked by Peter Sawkins, the 2020 winner of the Great British Bake Off. Yumza. Did you see the new portrait that was released to mark Armed Forces Day? His Majesty, of course, is Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Services, and the photograph by Hugo Bernand features His Majesty wearing his Field Marshal full ceremonial frock coat with medals, sword and decorations, and it was captured last November at Windsor Castle's Grand Corridor. And it's another one with his lips slightly ajar, yet another one, which I don't care for. But it seems to be a running theme. Perhaps he's got blocked nasal passages. But regardless, the Queen offered a message for Armed Forces Day, which was delivered flawlessly. Flawlessly. She is utterly regal, without even trying. Although I don't appreciate the way that she said the word strengthen, because you have to at least slightly acknowledge the G. It doesn't have to be strengthen, but strengthen. The has to be there, my dear. It's not strengthen. And she said strengthen. And actually, I noticed the Prime Minister doing it today. Keir Starmer, the same thing. It's not strength or strengthen, it's strengthen. And I don't mean to be overly pedantic, but there are some things that are just not cricket and can't be overlooked, my dear. So come on. You don't have to over-enunciate it, but it's not strengthen. That is just a faux pas. Anyway, she was on form for Tea for Tony, because Queen Camilla laid on a specialty for two little VIPs who missed the recent garden party at Buckingham Palace. Do you remember? They were stuck in traffic, and I said at the time, I'm just pretty sure that they will arrange something special. And they did. I'm talking about Tony Hudgell here, our friend Tony, and Lila O'Donovan in this instance, who was a young gal with a rare brain tumour, and she experiences seizures. And both of them had the chance to ride in the royal carriage, and they got an inside view of the changing of the guard, and they were serenaded by a military band, and they took afternoon tea in the summer house at Buckingham Palace with sandwiches and cakes and iced biscuits galore. How gorgeous. Tony was presented with his British Empire medal, so a beautiful day was had. And Prince William skated into action this morning. Did you see him? Skating along with glee he was. It looked such fun. Do you know, although I complain about those electric scooters, and I stand by that complaint because they're an absolute hazard out on the high street. Oh, they nearly knock me down whoops-a-daisy every week. Every week there's an incident, or I hear so. Well, you don't hear them, actually. That's the point. You don't hear them coming, and then they suddenly whiz by. You hear the air behind you suddenly whiz into velocity with these blades on wheels, coming to knock you over, coming from all directions. There I go complaining again, my dear, but they are dangerous, but they're not so dangerous in Windsor Castle, because William's got all the space in the world to scoot around, and that's exactly what he did. He's a big fan of these scooters, their green credentials, I suppose. So he had some fun with that. I've never had a go, but I can't wait to. I want to have a ride, but I'll be doing it responsibly. Do you understand? In the right environment. But as well as scootering around, he's been hobnobbing. Lots of knobbing going on with our big Willie. All for a magnificent cause, though, of course. All for magnificent causes, including the Story of Impact event at the Sky Garden in London. There he was, celebrating success stories involving Earthshot Prize finalists and their partners. It was a proud moment for him and his prize. And he was flirting away with Stella McCartney there, or should I say she was attempting to flirt with him, yanking his tie and pouring all over him. Dear girl she is, dear girl. You've got Alistair, lovey. You've got Alistair, and he's quite a dish, so, be happy with that, my darling. But also Michael Bloomberg was there, who is an advisor to the winners of the Earthshot Prize, as well as being a Global Alliance founding partner of the prize. Yes, he's got quite a deep involvement, and he spoke very highly of Prince William. William was characteristically very modest about this, but the others there wouldn't have it. They were showering him with praise, saying how they had seen him close up, being so intimately involved with the project, not just some sort of dilettante approach that you see from other quarters that won't be mentioned today. And also there was the Breakthrough Energy Summit with its founder, Bill Gates, in tow, bringing together leaders in technology, policy, science, academia and business to collaborate on innovative climate solutions. Quick little comment here from a viewer who sent me a tip jar treat. Thank you for that, my dear. Your name was... Did I write down your name? Oh, yes, Marie Stamp. Marie Stamp, my dear, said, River, Princess Anne will be attending a solemn ceremony in my hometown of St John's, Newfoundland on July the 1st as we bury a repatriated body of a World War I soldier for the 100th anniversary of our war memorial. I'm heading there for it, and it means a lot to everyone that the Princess Royal will be there. Spoiler alert, she wasn't. Her ancestor, George V, honoured the Newfoundland Regiment with the prefix Royal in 1917 because of the extraordinary commitment to the war effort from our small dominion, which was not part of Canada until 1949. If you observe war memorials in the UK, you will notice that we are always mentioned alongside Canada and Australia and India, etc. Well, thank you very much, Newfoundlander, by the name of Marie Stamp. Thank you very much, and I'm so sorry that you were disappointed. I don't know if you actually went along and attended this ceremony you speak of, but as you will have learnt by now, obviously, Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, was not able to attend due to her injuries sustained. Gladly we hear she's released from hospital, still tender and recovering. We hope she's doing very well, don't we, my dear? But sorely disappointing for her. And what a week. She's always got a busy week, but she's had to miss so much. She's had to miss all the appointments she had and her sort of tour to Canada. Quite upsetting. She said herself, "It is with deep regret that I'm unable to be with you today as you commemorate the brave efforts and the sacrifices of the Newfoundland Regiment who went into battle on the first day of the Somme. I'm deeply saddened that I'm unable to join you again, and I send my warmest, best wishes on this special day of commemoration." And even sadder news involving the Caribbean, where Hurricane Beryl has been wreaking havoc, and a message from His Majesty was released following this devastation of Hurricane Beryl across the Caribbean. He said, "My family and I have been profoundly saddened to learn of the dreadful destruction caused by Hurricane Beryl across the Caribbean. Above all, we send our heartfelt condolences to the friends and families of those who have so cruelly lost their lives. I have seen the extraordinary spirit of resilience and solidarity that people across the Caribbean have shown in response to such destruction, a spirit which has been called upon too often, and so I also send my particular gratitude to the emergency services and volunteers who are supporting the rescue and recovery efforts. At this most difficult of times, please know that our most special thoughts and prayers are with all those whose lives, livelihoods and property have been so utterly devastated. Charles R." And I sincerely hope that it hasn't affected any of my Caribbean fruits, but if it has, our love goes out to you, our thoughts and our special prayers, exactly as His Majesty says. I'm actually wearing pineapples on my ears today in honour of the Caribbean, my fruity friends in the Caribbean, presuming that pineapples come from the Caribbean. If I'm wrong, it's the thought that counts, isn't it, my dear? It's the thought that counts, so take it in that spirit. And I hope that you continue to channel the spirit and continue to stay fruity and always on royal duty, my dear, as we enter this perilous phase here in the kingdom. We've just got to channel the royal spirit and laugh our way through it, my dear, with good humour, a good dose of humour, some trepidation, but the sterling values that come with royalty. Inner steel, stoicism, that staunch character, haughtiness, and a few fruit crumbles. Ta-ta for now, my dears, and toodle pip.